I'm Rebecca Malotke-Meslin, and welcome to Finding Common Ground, a new show on Naperville Community Television focused on important current events and how they impact our diverse population. We are many voices of one community, often with strong opinions on every side of an issue.
And I'm Dana Davenport. In this episode, we are talking to parents in our community about their personal reactions to the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. Each of their stories is a window to the new or not so new discussions parents face around issues of race and privilege. Here, through courageous conversation, in the interest of discovering collaborative solutions, we hope to find our common ground. Joining us now are two moms, great friends of ours. I want to first introduce Kim White. How are you, Kim?
I'm doing great, Dana. How are you?
I'm good. Can you tell us a little bit about your family dynamic?
Yeah, so I moved here 15 years ago with my husband and our two children. We moved here, our son was starting 9th grade and our daughter was starting 4th grade. And so our son now is 28 and our daughter's 24.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And I want to welcome Jackie Claremont. So happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about your family dynamic.
Sure, I'm happy to be here also. I have been in the community for 40 years, so moved here with my parents. I now live actually in the same neighborhood I grew up in. Have 4 children, one in grade school, 2 in junior high, and 1 in high school. So I have watched Naperville grow since I was a youth myself.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. What was your reaction to the George Floyd murder? That was Memorial Day.
Memorial Day. Yeah, you know, I don't even remember what I was doing all day, but I remember that night. I was watching it. I had been hearing about something happened on TV, but I hadn't seen it. And so that night I was getting ready for bed and I saw it. I saw a bunch of people standing around. I saw police standing around, and I saw this man being, murdered on television. And I was, incredibly sad that this was happening again. That was my first thought, like, this is happening again. And then, I heard Mr. Floyd call out for his mother. And I think when I heard that, it just took me to another place. In that moment, I wondered, how is his mother receiving this? Not knowing if she was dead or alive, right, at that time. And, but I think as moms, we all hear the mother,
yes,
when our kids call us. And there's that mom, like, you're annoying me. And then there's that mom, like, they need help.
Oh, yeah.
And in that moment, I just wanted to help him. And it was just very hard to watch, very hard to watch.
My reaction was, how are people just standing around and watching this happen?
Filming
it. The time, the minutes that went by, that human beings were watching this happen to another human being and watching. So that was a big deal for me, of how can someone walk down the street and see this happen and not do anything about it. And then of course the mother, calling out for his mother. No matter what color your skin is at that point, the mother in you, your heart just wrenches for that. And you put yourself in that situation thinking, what if that was my child?
I know, no one's helping.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
People are just standing there watching.
Yeah, and not just but police.
Yeah.
Right.
Police
People of
standing there
authority.
watching. Yeah,
Yep.
people of authority.
You have teenagers at home, and they're on social media, I'm sure. So how quickly did your children find out about this, and what was that first conversation like?
We talked about it as a family, just, the injustice of all of it. Unfortunately, I think they look at social media and think everything that they hear is correct and right? They don't have a filter of knowing what's right, what's wrong. So, the coaching of that, to not believe everything you see right away, not take everything that you watch, learn, your friends tell you, really search through what the truth is, and then, we can discuss it together. So we had that discussion, but they heard and saw a lot of things that were not true, in my opinion, or were not just from references that weren't valid. So social media can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be very thought-provoking in the wrong direction that I want my children to go, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so for us, you know, we again watched it, and then talking to our kids who are back home with us because of COVID, right? So they're back. They both live back east, and our son couldn't watch it at all. He just couldn't watch it at all. And but talking to them, you know, our daughter was, "Why is this still happening?" And you know, this time was different, right? I think with COVID, you know, everybody was watching because people aren't commuting back and forth to work, and it's on TV all day. Kids are home. I mean, it was just really, it's something that's out there. So everybody's watching it. So I think, you know, having that conversation with our kids around it was just really, really difficult.
So what has the conversation been like with your friends about this?
So for me, I wrote a letter. I put out a Facebook post, and I actually went back and forth on you know, whether or not I wanted to do that, just because you don't know how people are going to respond on social media. So I put this post out there, and I got a ton of you know, response, a lot of you know, feedback. A lot of people reached out.
What did you say?
So the post just really talked about, in that moment, kind of over the course of a couple days, because I kept going back and forth to it, just what was going on in our house. You know, my husband was trying to put some words to paper because he was going to be giving a speech around it. And, you know, our daughter was having Zoom calls with her work colleagues back in DC. And our son, too, was having Zoom calls with his colleagues back in New York. And he came in, my husband and I were both working in the office, and he came in and he was about to go for a run. And so in that moment, you know, we all just froze. Not that hadn't happened before, but, you know, it was, in that moment we just looked at each other and thought, oh my goodness, you know, is this, you know, how do we feel about this? But we knew conversations we've had in the past and all of that. But in the letter, I just, you know, I really just wanted to talk about my family dynamics, and how we were all feeling. And I talked about being a mother of Black kids and raising Black kids and the differences. I think, you know, there's a lot of similarities as mothers. We want our kids to, you know, be healthy and happy, find their person, you know, do all those things. But raising Black kids, you also have to, you know, talk to them about, you know, if you have an encounter with the police, or, you know, when you be prepared for the N-word, those types of things. And so I shared that in my letter, and then I just got tons of response from friends and family, but from friends. And some people I heard from, some people I didn't.
And that says something too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kim, your post woke me up. I put myself in your situation and was, you know, looking at your words and looking how you talked about, you know, things you have to talk with your children about that I don't as a white woman. And I like put myself in your words and realized the difference of parenting from a white point of view and a Black point of view. I don't have those conversations with my kids, but it gave me an open heart and compassion, and I think more knowledge of, you know, the struggles that you have and that I don't as a white woman. So I appreciated your post, and it woke me up to things that I wasn't relevant to before that. So
Yeah.
I thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I heard that from a number of people, and I think that, you know, sometimes people think, well, it doesn't happen to you, right? You know, from a socioeconomic standpoint, you know, we would be considered privileged, I guess. But at the end of the day, you know, we're Black, and we've been discriminated against. You know, my husband, myself, our kids. It doesn't really matter with that privilege. And so I think some of the comments I got from people was, I can't believe this happens to you. I can't believe that this has happened to you all. And if it can happen to you, it can happen to anyone. Yeah.
I think it brings a light to how the injustice hits and the way that it impacts. I also talked about my perspective as a mother of a special needs Black son, in addition to having a daughter as well. And it's important because his triggers may not necessarily be something that's easily apparent or readily apparent. So, and that can be interpreted as defiance with an authority. That could cost him his life. What are white people saying about Black Lives Matter?
That's a good question.
Well, I know that, I'm also a mother. I have 2 white sons. And, those same kinds of conversations started coming up in our household when George Floyd was murdered. And we talked a lot about those experiences and how different they are from my sons, right? So my children are 8 and 11. And my 11-year-old and I had quite an in-depth discussion about it. And I realized in that moment that we had talked about racism. We had talked about things like aggression and microaggressions, macroaggressions, what that looks like, and being an upstander, right? Because we've had that bullying conversation about standing up for your friends, and but we needed to give it in the context of racism, and that's when Black Lives Matter started to come into the conversation, and what that really means, and caring for others. And my 11-year-old totally got it. I mean, he was looking at it through this lens of understanding, yet he'll never really get it, right? Because he doesn't have to live that experience. So the stories that I think we're hearing out of the Black community right now are having that impact, like your story did, right? And like your story did, on so many of us who don't have those lived experiences. And so I think at a time when Black Lives Matter for a lot of white people felt like it didn't apply to them, suddenly they're seeing those Black lives are their community members, their friends, right? And it's looking a lot different. It's a different lens.
We also were talking just as much about understanding white privilege, right? And that's a hard term, I think, for kids to understand. And so I tweaked it as, unearned advantages, right? So we have advantages that are given to us, earned or not, as a white family. So we really kind of opened that up a bit. And I think since, we are a white family, they understood that, and that made the Black Lives Matter more understanding. I don't know if that makes sense, but once they understood the things that as a white family we have advantages, then they understood the disadvantages, right? And so it was a good conversation of opening up ideas and thoughts that I don't think were in their head before, right?
And Kim, you talked about, you didn't hear from some people that maybe you expected to. Are your white friends checking up on you? Are they checking in with you?
Yeah, they are. I mean, I guess I would group people. I have my circle, I have friends, I have acquaintances, right? So I've heard from a number of people. There are some people I haven't heard from, right? So, but those that I have heard from, it's interesting. We one day there was a knock on the door, right? It's COVID, we're not really opening the door for people, but someone's banging on the door. And I go out to open the door, and there's 4 huge bouquets of flowers outside on our front porch. And I immediately try to go, run down the delivery driver, because I'm like, someone died. Like, where did all these flowers come from?
It's not my birthday.
Yeah, it's not my birthday, but who gets 4 bouquet of flowers at the same time? So, he lets the window down, and I said, I don't think these are for me. These are for this house. And he goes, what's your name? And I said, Kim White. He goes, oh no, they're for you. So then I opened the card. And so the card's from, a dear friend, and I sent a bouquet to one to my husband and my kids. And just really talked about, one, being a friend, but 2, what can I do? What can we do? I want to be part of the, part of the solution here. I want to sit down and talk about this. So yeah, we are hearing from friends, and then some people we have not.
Do you think the conversation in terms of raising children who are Black versus white has some of those differences, right? You had talked about some of that, about your conversation and your narratives being different. Sometimes I think about it being similar to how we raise girls versus boys. There's certain conversations you need to have, particularly with girls when it comes to safety, for example, where the narrative, of course we want our boys to be safe, but the narrative may be a bit different. Does that help contextualize the types of conversations we need to be having with children, particularly the younger kids, about Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. So when I think about when you start to have that conversation, I think about elementary school, first day of school, or probably first grade, and kids are, learning about history, and they start to learn about Black history, and the narrative around Black history is, slavery.
Right.
And so white kids and Black kids are in the class together, and they're hearing this. And so they hear it there, they go home, and there's no continued conversation around that.
Well, and I think about white parents, right? So Black children are coming home and they're in pain, right?
Yeah.
They're hearing these things, they're reading these things, and they're feeling pain from it. And white children are coming home, and they might have some realizations, but they're probably not in pain, because this isn't something that they're feeling. They're not the subject of it. But there's a lot of white parents that are just afraid to have that conversation. So if your white child comes home and starts asking you questions, right, and you don't feel equipped to answer them, what do we do? And I think a lot of white parents deflect the conversation, right? It's like they're scrambling a lot of times because we don't feel like we have the authority, right? And it's so centered in our whiteness too. Jackie, do you, as your kids were coming home and you were learning about what they were learning about in school, did you feel equipped to have those conversations with your kids?
Not really. I think the older I get and the more I start doing personal research and my own searching for understanding and listening to others, listening to Black mothers talk about how they parent. That is where my education is growing, because I'm choosing to reach and look for those resources. So to those parents that don't feel comfortable talking to their white children about slavery or really any interracial relationships, I would suggest that they need to do their own inner searching, which I have just begun on this journey. I've always been a compassionate person, the golden rule, treat others, but I'm also not a Black mother, and I see a different, I don't have to struggle, like the two of you might have to do with your children. So I think if more white families would acknowledge that exists and that's a true thing, then you can only learn and be compassionate and find ways to, tell those stories to your children. Right?
Yeah, and I would say oftentimes you don't even know that the conversation is happening at school, right?
Right.
And so for us, it's one of those things that you know when they, when February comes around, they're going to talk about Black history. So you need to start having those conversations when they come home. And so we had already, prompted our kids, if you will, about, or my husband and I talked about at what age do we talk to our kids about, the N-word and all of that. So, we were prepared. But if it's not happening in the homes of the white families, then that's just, there's been this, this is the way that people have, this is, their mindset now moving forward.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk more about the conversations that we're having about race with our kids. We'll be right back.
Stay informed with NCTV 17 News Update. These free videos sent straight to your email summarize the latest information and show you what's happening around town. Visit nctv17.com/subscribe to sign up now.
Welcome back to Finding Common Ground. I'd like to continue the conversation by talking a little bit about white fragility. And I think it's a term that's really, a lot is being spoken about it. There's a book about it, but a lot of people don't necessarily understand what that means. And what's interesting is that the whole concept behind it, right, is that as we have these conversations about race, white people are taking such great offense that they might themselves be perpetrators of racism. And instead, the concept behind it is that we're trying to help people, specifically white people, identify their implicit bias and be able to say, you can still be a good person and be racist, right? But if you don't own it, if you don't call it what it is, then you'll never be an anti-racist. You'll never get past that. So I think a lot of people are seeing that now, again, on social media, in the news. Talk a little bit about what that looks like and the response, maybe what a fragile white response might look like, or how you've experienced it.
I try to stay off of social media right now, just because it's not like the best place to be around this issue. So there's all these groups out there, and depending on what group you sign on to, you'll read things that people are saying, and the thing is they're not private, so it's people you know.
Right.
It's like, tell me
A lot of people.
Tell me how you really feel.
Yeah, a lot of people. And in this COVID world, obviously I'm not seeing these people, but I'm actually reading a lot of what people are saying. And I think to your point, Rebecca, we all have biases, we all have these things, right? But you have to be able to confront those things and be able to look in the mirror and say, this is how I feel about this is how I feel about that, but then what are you going to do about it, right? So when I see this stuff on social media, it's really disheartening. It's very sad. I don't know. I don't know what I'll do when I see some of these people in person.
Well, and from a
around it,
parenting
so.
perspective, right? Like, you're looking at people who have children, and you're thinking, if that's how they're looking, right, that's the lens they're looking at the world, then that's probably what they're also teaching their children. And
I think if you own, I say I'm not a racist person. In my heart, I'm not. But I'm sure I have, unconscious bias that are just systematically within me from where I was, white family, where I grew up, that I think if you own it, you apologize it, and you learn from it. That doesn't make it okay, but at least you're acknowledging, to somebody say, oh, I'm not racist, I have a black friend. Or if I'm not
black family member.
Or a black, right, or, that's kind of a red flag even to me as a white person, that you need to, I have things I still need to work on, being, a white woman in a white community. That to make myself better, to make me understand black, brown, whatever it may be, the struggles, and be compassionate and hopefully make a change somehow.
Yeah.
But I think if white people would just acknowledge that they do have some sort of racism or prejudice, and then grow from there, I think that would be a first step for the white community.
Yeah.
And part of the fragility is just the simple denial of the privilege, which is, it can be a trigger word that there is privilege. And some people take that to mean that I haven't been through struggles, I haven't had hardships, I haven't had a difficult life. You can enjoy privilege, whether it be socioeconomic, racial, sexual privilege, and still go through things, still have hard times in other areas. And so part of it is just acknowledging that it exists in the first place, and that people have experiences that are outside of your own. Some of the things that we've been talking about earlier have just been really about allyship and what that means, what it means to understand someone else's experiences and not judge them through your own lens, meaning that I accept your experiences as being your own, and what you've been through, because it's not my experience, but also learning how to be your ally, right? Not just selecting, you're gonna be my black friend, but being intentional about making some of those connections and making connections in an authentic way. So let's talk about that, because I think this is a great lesson for those who are watching about how you have conversations about being an ally. And let's start with ourselves, and then maybe we can talk more about how you pass some of these messages on to your children.
So, for me, when I think about, the importance of allyship is, I think, we always want that person or folks who are, kind of coming alongside us and helping us.
And have your back, too.
Yeah, and have your back,
You
right?
need to know who you can trust in all of this, too.
Right. And so, and if I think back to Mr. Floyd's, murder and just watching, what happened that day, for me, I realized in that moment, like we need all the mamas, right? It was so if it wasn't painfully clear before then, it became painfully clear after that. That in order for us to acknowledge and move forward, we needed allyship from mamas to come together, because this needed to stop happening, right? And so, that's just where I am with that in terms of allyship. I mean, we need our white mamas. We need everyone to come together.
Kim, as a white mother, what would what can we do what can we do to help, or to make it a better place for everybody? How can we as white mothers help Black mothers?
I think it's being part of the conversation, right? I think people need to be intentional about their circle. Like who's part of your circle, right? If your circle, I share this, I say this a lot. If your circle on a Friday night is being around a table with everyone who looks like you, that's a problem, right? And so I think what we need is for people to educate themselves. I don't think you need to look for, Black mothers and fathers to talk about the things you would need to, books you would need to read and all that. I mean, it's about really educating yourself around that. I know you've talked about that as something that you're doing now specifically.
And I can answer that question too. I think there's so many different ways in which you can demonstrate allyship. You can talk, if you have younger kids, you can start there, because they're so impressionable about understanding and appreciating and celebrating differences. When your kids come home with the Black History Month lesson, which will be very interesting to see how that's changed next year.
Right.
But have those conversations and conceptualize what that really means. I think for older children, I think it's about having conversations as they make friends of different colors. Teach them to be allies when they're out in social settings. These incidents, when people are dying, happen in minutes. There's no preview, there's no setup for it.
No.
It happens in a split second. So it's what do? Raise children who would react in a George Floyd moment. If your child was a bystander walking down the street when George Floyd was being murdered, or it was, even if the police weren't involved, but raise children that would be responsive safely, right? I don't want other people dying or being hurt, but taking action, being children of action and change, speaking up when they see things that are wrong. And it doesn't have to be a murderous situation.
Absolutely.
It could be a Halloween costume. It can be a joke. It could be a Craigslist post. It could be so many different things where there's these micro inequities where someone needs to say, hey, that's not cool. And those need to be the conversations that are happening when there are no Black people in the room. Weaponize your wallet, right? Don't support businesses that are known to be owned by people who are racist. I'm no longer going to support this business because you don't seem to get it. You don't support Black Lives Matter. And also support places that do, that are trying to make a change when it comes to some of the corruption in our systems, and are supporting movements that support efforts to kind of end, the systematic oppression and the racial unfairness.
Well, and I think about all the times that we're on the playground picking up our kids after school, or we're in social situations, hopefully soon. And there was a great quote by a woman named Glennon Doyle, and she was talking about how she wished it wasn't circles. You mentioned circles, right? Who's in your circle? She's like, I wish they were horseshoes.
Yeah. More open.
Yeah.
Because then it would open and invite people in. And I feel so fortunate to have some friends who a lot of which have lived in lots of different places and moved around a lot. And what I've noticed about people who have lived in lots of certain places, they've once been an outsider. So whether they're a person of color, a black person, a white person, if you've moved around a lot, you've experienced as an adult what it's like to be an outsider. And if we looked at it through that lens, right, and you're standing in a group of people and you see that it's a closed circle, open that circle up, look around you, invite somebody in. And I have, you know, again, I have some great friends who have modeled that for me, but think about how that models it for our children, right? When they see you doing that, right, that's the greatest teacher. But if you're never showing them how that's done, and then we're telling them to do it, right? So how are we going to change our everyday behaviors, right? So to be an ally, I think it is acknowledging we need to change our behavior
You have to
every
be
day.
intentional too. Yeah, you have to be intentional around it.
Right.
You know, my son played basketball at junior high this year, and there were a couple black boys on the team. And I said, you know, are you friends with them? Oh, yeah, I'm friends with them. I'm friends with them. And then the season was over. And I'm like, well, did you ever want to invite them over to the house? You know, so they were friends when they were on the team together, right? Friends.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what, let's be more intentional with those sort of things. If they're really your friends, let's invite them. Let's not just be a friend because you're on the team together.
Right,
you know, so like just starting, I think, conversations like that.
And I think that's great because, as we all know, those real relationships in school are not cemented in the classroom.
No.
Those real friendships
Right.
and
On the
connections
playground,
are cemented outside of the classroom. The sleepovers, the hanging out after school, you know, the carpooling,
Yeah.
even carpooling.
Yeah.
Those things are what make some of those bonds.
You learn a lot in carpools.
You learn a lot in carpools.
You do learn a lot in
learn a lot in
carpool.
Yeah.
I love
carpooling.
carpooling.
and take this from a girl who grew up in suburbia. You know, that's where the inclusion comes in.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
where people feel included because they're invited. It's not, you know, it's not the parties where it's obligatory to invite everybody, but it's like, hey, you know, do you want to come home, you know, for pizza or you know, just hanging out or a sleepover or whatever? That's when I have found, and I have seen, not only for myself, but in my own children, those true connections because people feel more responsible for those kids. Like for me and for my kids, I feel like I have to kind of be the social engineer for them and coordinating that. And one thing I've taught them, and this is how I'm raising my children, is if you do some of the inviting, people will eventually invite you back. But I grew up like that. So I think for adults, you know, of color who may not be as familiar or used to white people, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So don't think it's only white people uncomfortable. I think
Right.
everybody's
Yeah, yeah,
uncomfortable
yeah.
just because of how we have been raised. But you can change that because I have no problems saying, white folks come over and play with my kids. And we laugh and joke about it, but they reciprocate.
Yeah.
And so it's not even where color's an issue or a big deal.
Yeah.
And what has happened with that is that my son has had advocates, particularly in his special needs space, but friend advocates who at school who have stood up for him, who have shown up for him. And that was just when, you know, there was a school situation that didn't go well. But I was in tears because I was like, wow, you know, these may be the same kids who could save my son's life. You know, it wasn't a life and death, it was just art class.
Right.
But you know,
But
these,
still,
that's how they grow up though.
that's how they grow
But
up.
they learn advocacy, and that's why it was important for me as a mother to speak up for all of those kids who had spoken up for my son. And that's just kind of an example of what I see and how it can make a big difference. So you did the exact right thing, I think. I mean, it's steps like those, you know, that really bring about change because everybody learns from, and everybody benefits from those moments where people are intentional and they're diversifying and blending and, you know, socializing with people who just happen to not look like them.
Do you find that, you know, so the term code switching, I think is also something that a lot of white people are unfamiliar with, but has become much more popularized recently given all that's going on, and that idea that you kind of have to hide a part of who you are. And I'm just curious, in Naperville in particular, because it's such a white community, if the idea that you have to kind of hide your blackness or hide some part of who you are, has that been something that's been bothersome in Naperville, just talking specifically about our community, or do you feel like that hasn't been your experience?
You know, that hasn't been my experience. I don't know about you, Dana, but.
Code switching. To explain, you know, code switching is when you either talk different or dress different or act differently than you would at home to make other people, particularly white people, feel more comfortable. That's an interesting question because I feel like I'm always my authentic self. Y'all know that.
That's what I love about you.
Right?
Right. You know, but I'm a little bit of everything, you know, particularly of how I grew up. But, you know, I grew up with people, white people, you know, obviously recognize my blackness. But so there were black people who called me a white girl. And so I've always kind of been just me in the middle.
Dana being Dana.
Dana. But I got to a point where I was like, this is just going to be who I am. And you're either going to love it or you're not. And so that's the courageous conversation that I had to have with myself about who I am and what I want to be. And I'm all inclusive, so everybody's welcome. But you always encounter people who will see that in you and try to tear that down. I don't find that in Naperville, though, from my experience. But how has Naperville changed you guys have been here, you were here all your life, you've been here for 15 years. Have you seen a difference in Naperville when it comes to race?
When I was a child, I remember being at the gas station right by the neighborhood that I grew up in, and a car full of black men were at the gas station. And I remember looking at my mother saying, they must be lost. Like my mom, I just thought, oh, they must be lost. Like they don't, because it just wasn't something that was prevalent within the community when I was younger. I think it is a more diverse community. I think it's a more accepting community. I think there's a lot of work to do still. But I just remember, I don't know why I thought they must be lost, but I think it was just, I don't think I was exposed to people that were different than me when I was growing up here in the community, right? I did have it, when I was in grade school, my PE teacher was a black man. And he was one of my favorite teachers, and I don't remember thinking he was black. Like his color made like no difference to me. I then saw him, gosh, like 6 months ago at a implicit bias, like open conversation discussion, and he talked about the struggles that he had as a black man, you know, in the school district and one of the first ones, and I opened my eyes to, wow, like that's something I never saw in him or in my heart even knew that he was going through those things. So I think in different aspects of your life, you realize things, and I realized his struggle that I never saw when I was growing up.
It's good for you to see that and to appreciate that. That's what this is really all about. It's about appreciating other people's experiences that are different from your own. How has this changed you? The Black Lives Matter, George Floyd's murder. How has this changed you in any way?
For me, it's self-reflection. I mean, I've just been doing a lot of research. I'm trying to learn. I wasn't listening or hearing or searching and listening to other people's struggles. So for me, I'm just trying to be a better version of me and trying to learn more from others.
Yeah. I think for me, I mean, you know, I think just in general, I look at how hopefully this, not really just changing me, but changing our country, right? You know, our community, our country. I think, you know, when I think about #MeToo, I think this is #MeToo for civil rights and how we move forward, right? And so I'm hopeful. I know that, you know, when you think about the 60s and late 60s, you know, it didn't happen overnight, but I think, you know, we have that allyship, we have people who are educating themselves, people who are, you know, wanting to grow from this and see us move to the other side of this, right? Embrace diversity, embrace inclusion, see the wrong in all of this. Systemic racism has been, you know, around for years, right? Centuries. It's time, you know. So it's not about changing me, but hopefully it's changing the hearts and mind of people within our community. I think, I hear a lot about, folks who talk about, Naperville's not a racist community and Naperville this, and people are quick to defend. And what's happening here in our community happens in communities all over the country, right? But what are you going to do about it? You got to have those conversations. They're uncomfortable for everybody. It's uncomfortable for me. It's probably uncomfortable, it's uncomfortable. But we got to have those conversations because in order to move forward, we need everybody on. We can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. And there needs to not be another George Floyd.
Yep. Well, the mamas have spoken.
Yeah.
We appreciate you ladies for being
So much.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is an awesome conversation, and it's more conversations that we need to be having. We're going to be right back, and we'll be back with some fathers talking about Black Lives Matter.
Welcome back to Finding Common Ground. We want to start the segment by introducing our guests. And we've brought on a couple of fathers who are part of our Naperville community to talk to us a little bit about race, Black Lives Matter, and parenting. So we're going to start with you, Cliff. Thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about your family dynamic and how long you've been in Naperville?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm 43 years old. I've basically lived in Naperville since I was 6. Married, I have 4 kids, 1 daughter, Maggie, who's 13, going into 8th grade at Gregory. My boys, Will is 10, going into 5th grade. Kobe's 8, going into 3rd grade. And then I have a little guy, Finn, who's on my socks, he's 3 and he hasn't had a haircut yet. So I got a full house.
Yeah.
So I work downtown for a company, William Blair. I've been there for 9 years. I was traveling a decent amount, so we'll see how that goes in the future. But yeah, so I grew up in Naperville. My kids have grown up in Naperville. So I guess that's really it.
Yeah.
Great.
And welcome, Gerald. Gerald
Good evening.
Lewis.
How are you?
It's so good to have you joining us for this episode. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your family dynamic?
Sure. So I am a proud father of 3. So I have boy-girl twins that are 4 years old, Parker and Peyton. And I have an 8-year-old, Caden, 8-year-old son, and proud husband of my wife, Tiffany. And we have lived in Naperville now for just under 3 years. Raised our children early on in the south suburbs, and really we're excited about what Naperville could offer us as a family, and so we transplanted and moved over, so it's been exciting.
Great. So we're going to jump right in. Tell us about your reaction to the George Floyd murder.
I can say my reaction was heavy heart. I think it honestly was kind of a few months in February, the Arbery one kind of got it going with my wife and talking to our kids, and then the George Floyd happened in the end of May. And it just makes you sad because we're just not being good to each other, being good humans, treating each other with respect. So that was it's been tough. I mean, it's definitely, I think being at home all this time stuck in quarantine makes it worse. So when you have, everyone's already kind of in the doldrums a little bit, right? And so then you have this stuff happen, and it makes you kind of lose confidence in the human race and just being good people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, like Cliff, I think my initial reaction was anger. I was very angry because for me it brought up a lot of pain that I've seen, that I've experienced, and it just takes you back to, just years and years of just the same old thing happening, and just to see it play out the way it did, over 8 minutes of just pain. So I was angry, and then the anger turned to sadness, and you just really start to lose hope that, we're going to get to a place where this type of stuff doesn't happen.
Oh, I was going to say, I know you both have young children. You also have a teenager, it sounds like, or getting close to it.
13.
13,
Yeah.
And I know, as parents, we're nervous to talk about certain subjects with our kids. And I think race is definitely up there, especially for white parents.
Yeah.
But talk to us a little bit about what conversations, if any, you had about what happened to George Floyd with your kids.
I think that for us brought up the whole white privilege thing. So if you had asked me what white privilege was 6 months ago, I would have said it means you're a trust fund baby, like that sort of thing. So I don't think I had I know I didn't have a grasp on it. But when the George Floyd incident happened, Heidi, my wife Heidi, at dinner, started talking to the kids about, you need to understand that this stuff is happening out there, and you guys haven't been subject to any of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when it kind of dawned on me that, like, I've had this great life growing up, and I've worked really hard for everything I have. I know people get so defensive about that with the white privilege thing. Mm-hmm. You say, like, well, I've worked hard, I deserve it. It's like, well, it's it's not about that. It's that, I've been a runner. My oldest is running. Like, I've never been out on a run or a jog and worried about, like, my safety or anything like that. I mean, Gerald and I were talking earlier, and I told him, like, when I go running, if you disturb me when I'm running, you're gonna get the middle finger. Like, I'm gonna get angry.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not worried about my safety.
Right.
So these incidents kind of brought that out. It's like, our kids need to understand that, like, hey, there's places in the country where you have to worry, and even in Naperville, you have to worry. And so if you're black, you're dealing with things that white people just haven't had to deal with, and it's never crossed my mind. So that was kind of the big conversation that the George Floyd incident led to.
Mm-hmm. For me, have I had a conversation with my kids? It's a good question, because in the outset of George Floyd, I delayed having a conversation because there were so many emotions that were going through me. I wanted to make sure that the message came out right with my kids. And it's interesting for me and my wife Tiffany, we have young kids. We have the 4-year-old twins and we have the 8-year-old. So the 8-year-old, Caden, I initially started to have some conversations recently with Caden, and then I'm proud to say that I took the twins to our first march, and we marched in Lisle this past weekend, and that was probably the catalyst for me to have conversation with my twins. And they're not going to understand, all the dynamics and the history and the pain and everything, but it was interesting to get a 4-year-old's take on what was happening. Yeah. And what they clearly could see happening was unity, in the sense that you had people from all different backgrounds walking together for a reason. And they knew that. And, as I shared with them what it was about, and, putting more awareness to social injustice, I was getting the questions from 4-year-olds. What is social injustice? And you try and put it in as simple terms as you can for a 4-year-old to process. But what I let them know was that there are a lot of things in life that are unfair. And, because of the color of our skin, there's a history and there's a fight that is going on to, for equality and for social justice and to make things right. And I think they understood that. But there's going to be there's a lot more conversations to be had, and I think I humbly can say that I'm scratching the surface in terms of really talking to my kids. There's so much more to talk about, about where we are right now and where we're trying to go. So,
When you see people defensive of white privilege, what do you hear them say? Or what do you think, how does that narrative of conversation go?
It's usually like, Cliff, you know me, like I've worked so hard for everything I have. I haven't had anything given to me. And it's like, well, yeah, that's true. Nobody's saying that that's not true, it's that. But has the color of your skin ever held you back from getting an opportunity? Have you ever been worried when you go out running that you fear for your safety or fear for your kid's safety, which as a parent is like tenfold of fearing for your own safety, right? That becomes paramount. Have you ever been pulled over and worried about, and so I mentioned I travel a lot. In October, so I had like these hellish day trips sometimes, and I had to go to Albuquerque, and I instead of staying that night, since I got 4 kids, I wanted to get home. So my flight's delayed. I'm driving back from O'Hare at like 10:30 at night. I am flying down the highway. I get off 355. I'm coming down 75th. I'm going like 69 miles an hour in a 45. I get pulled over. And it's the first time I've been pulled over in like 10 years. But the first thing I thought of was, God damn it, like I want to get out of this ticket. Like I don't want to pay the money, that sort of thing. Not, do I need to worry about my safety?
Will I get home?
Yeah, that's white privilege.
Yeah.
I was worried about the financial aspect and just being bothered, just wanting to get home, so that to me is white privilege.
Yeah.
So as fathers, we know that there's a lot of stereotypes about men and masculinity and fathers, and that you want to be stoic and you want to be strong and you want to be protectors of your children. But sometimes that means it's hard to be vulnerable in front of our kids. And you expressed some emotions that you were feeling with George Floyd's murder, right? Sadness, anger. Did you allow your children to see that? And if so, what was their reaction to that? How did they respond to you in those moments?
Yeah, for me, right, like I think I still think to this day I'm a little guarded with showing my emotions to my kids, because there is this sense of, do I really want them to see that vulnerability and that fear? I think this past weekend, for the first time, my twins saw a side of me that they haven't seen, which was a little of my sadness coming out. There was a very delicate part of the march where we got to City Hall and everybody kneeled, and people were just basically expressing their emotion outward for people to hear. And what they've experienced in their life. And the culmination of all that really drew me to visible sadness that my kids could see. And I was more probably concerned for them because I didn't want them to be fearful. But at the same time, I think this time calls for some vulnerability for your kids to see really what is bothering and what is hurting their parent. And this is a conversation that I think has to be had, not only with our kids, but when you think about the impact they're going to have when they hang out with their friends as they get older, and as they're hearing things and people are saying things to them, these early conversations are really going to matter for them to lay the foundation. So,
I think being emotional is, at least to an extent, is really a good thing. Allowing yourself to, whether it cry, be angry, whatever.
Yeah.
It's healthy. That's how you feel. You should let it out. So I think it's good for your kids to see that, because then they see how something affects you, and it puts in perspective for them. They think, well, if dad's this upset or if mom's this upset about something, there's something to it, and maybe I should feel like that, or at least maybe I should understand.
It's okay if I feel that way.
Yeah.
I need to understand, like, why does my parent feel like that? So I think it's good, and I think, like, with this stuff, my 10-year-old Will, he gets upset. He plays sports and he gets too upset in sports. Like he's like that sort of thing. But things you can see that they affect him, and so he'll cry about this stuff. And I love that about him because he allows emotion to get him in a good way.
Yeah.
As dads, and I know you all to be great dads, you thrive on protecting your family. You're good protectors, both emotionally, physically, and in so many different ways. How has what's happened in our community, in our world, with George Floyd and the subsequent marches? We've had looters, we've had people who are not well-intentioned, some of the hatred, the viral hatred, white supremacists. I mean, all these people coming out with all these raging emotions. How does that impact how you protect your family, or your thoughts about, okay, as a father, how am I going to protect my family, in this space, and with so much uncertainty now as we're navigating?
Yeah. Well, I would say, for Caden, for the 8-year-old, I think, and to a certain extent the twins too, I think there's protection and awareness to the reality of what's going on out here. So just really making sure that I don't hold back for them and not let them see. And so with everything going on the TV, it's hard to get away from a lot of the coverage, but what I've done is really started to open up that coverage to all 3 of my kids to start to have them thinking and have dialogue. I think when you think about, me growing up as a black man, and some of the experiences I've been through, some of these conversations that, black families have, in terms of, if you get pulled over by a cop, don't try and fight, don't try and argue, do everything you're told. I think those conversations are still warranted conversations for my family. And when I talk to my kids, I haven't had that kind of conversation yet, but it's a conversation that I definitely plan to have because I do believe it's important to have. And, I know, Cliff, you mentioned running out and going on a run and not being worried. And, maybe your first instinct is not safety, for my kids. That's what I thought about when I saw George Floyd, is that could be me, that could be my kids, that could be, my wife, on the ground. Okay. And that's the reality, so.
Yeah.
Kim White, who was on obviously the first part of this, had the article in the Herald, and she had her son, Ben, had the article in the Trib. And her article, she talked about while she was putting her thoughts down on paper, her son was going out for a run and she was worried. And when I read that, it's like it's never occurred to me. It's never occurred to me to have that. But I think with the kids too, you have to, you have to tell them to stand up for what's right. Yeah. It's never occurred to me to have some of the things that you said, to tell them that no one's driving yet, thank God. Well, when they get to that point, if you get pulled over, don't talk back, don't do this. That's not a conversation I've ever even thought about having with them about getting pulled over or anything for that matter. But I do think the conversations that we've had are, if you see somebody getting bullied or you see somebody doing something racist at school or something that's not right, and in your heart that's not right, you stand up for yourself. Yeah. And I will always back you, if that's the case.
Do you think it's similar in the conversations you have about how you talk to your sons about girls, or how you talk to your daughters about boys? Because there's differences, right?
Right. Dana and I were talking about the fact that, I'm raising 2 white sons, and after the Me Too movement, I realized that I hadn't done a very good job of educating my boys about things like consent, right? And that, a lot of the violence against women, the vast majority of it is perpetrated by men, right?
Yeah.
And so what have I done to help, talk to my boys? we've done such a good job of talking to girls about how to protect yourself, right? In the way
Right.
that you're talking to your children about what's going to happen when you are getting pulled over.
Right.
But not enough conversations have happened with boys and men about things like consent, because you're actually the one doing the perpetrating. Why are we putting this on the victim?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that we were talking about that parallel and how, you know, it's not going to be the same conversation for you, Cliff, right? But it's letting your children know potentially what Gerald's kids are going to be going through. And what
Yeah.
if they're in the car
Yeah.
when their black friend gets pulled over?
That's right, and I think the recent events have kind of put that in perspective. Like before, if maybe I wouldn't say anything about some of that stuff, or just since I wasn't even really aware of it. Now you for those reasons you have to, even if they're not in the car with somebody down the road. Just you need to understand that, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. That's really what it comes down to. You know, like in the classes for like my kids, like there might be 1 or 2 black kids. It's not that's not a lot. And I'm curious to hear from you. You know, when I bet for your kids, is it the same thing?
Same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just right there, I mean, you're one. I mean, think about if you're the only kid of a race in the class, right? I mean, like that's got to be pretty intimidating. So kids need to understand. My kids need to understand. All kids need to understand and be respectful. Put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Think about how hard it might be for that person. So maybe, you know, help them out, right? Be a friend. Do something. Be a good person.
Yeah, it's good you brought that up, Cliff, right? For my 8-year-old Caden, he goes to school in the city, so his experience is a little bit different than my twins. For my twins, in preschool, they're the only black people in their class, and this is preschool. And so I always wonder, you know, obviously, how is that going to translate as they get older? But then, you know, I think, you know, I mentioned something earlier about, you know, when I saw the George Floyd incident over and over, and I watched it multiple times, there were just a lot of different stories and a lot of different incidents that have either happened to me or that I've been told that just all culminated into me watching this. And that's what brought about a lot of the pain. And the reason I go back to my kids is because what I think about is, if, God forbid, that incident ever happens at school where they're called the N-word, and it's happened to colleagues of mine at work, have told me stories of their young kids, my twins' age and Caden's age, you know, being called that. And they don't know how to respond to that. And so when you talk about defending them, I want to be there when that happens, but the reality is I'm not probably going to be in a lot of those situations that they get involved in. And so there's only so much you can do to prepare your kids. And I know I have a lot of work to do as a dad to help prepare them, but I just have in the back of my mind, are they going to be ultimately prepared? Are they going to be emotionally ready for whenever that happens? And how is it going to really affect them? Because that's what's really going to crush me, right? Is there, you know, what happens as a result of that?
Well, we're going to talk about some of that allyship and defense and support of our kids, but we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
And welcome back to Finding Common Ground. So we were just talking about an experience that a friend of yours had. Would you tell us that story?
Yeah, sure. You know, so, you know, when I think about my kids and thinking about the experiences that they could be up against as they grow and get older, you know, I think about, you know, a story that my good friend and colleague of mine at work told me about his children, who are about the same age as my children. And, you know, he at the time was living in the Milwaukee area with his family, and, you know, his his daughter came home and told him that, another student had called her the N-word, and obviously the immediate reaction was, well, we got to talk to the principal about this. This is unacceptable. And this is probably, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years ago, and of course, the parents went to speak to the principal, and it was almost as if the principal was trying to brush it aside and acknowledge it happened, but minimize it. We don't need to blow this up. We don't need to, for the sake of the parents and the children, we don't need to get into the drama. And as Anthony's telling me this, I just could not believe, number one, that would be the initial reaction from the school. But at that time, Anthony had every right to just go off, right? And, Anthony's the most mild-mannered, one of the most mild-mannered guys that I know. And, I could just sense the anger in his voice as he was telling me the story. But, certainly they did get to a point where there was some action taken. But it told me, and I thought about that story when I, was reflecting on George Floyd, and you asked the question about, protecting your kids.
Right.
And this idea that you can't always have your arms around them every step of the way. There's going to be some moment. And I think about that, and that's probably the pessimist in me, but I think that there's going to be some moment where you're not going to be able to protect I'm not going to be able to protect Caden or Peyton or Parker, and they're going to get exposed to some type of racism. And how are they going to handle it in that moment? And what was my reaction going to be?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, obviously, your parents had conversations with you about race, treating humankind. What are some of the lessons that your parents taught you, and or things that you've seen in yourself when it comes to your parenting with your children, particularly about this issue?
I think I had a lot of good talks with my dad. Some of them didn't really resonate until I went away to college at University of Illinois. And when you're freshmen, you live in the dorm, and they put these like stickers up on the doors, says your name, where you're from. Mm-hmm. So me and my roommate are from Naperville. Our whole floor hated us because we're from Naperville, so they viewed us as rich kids.
Yeah.
So that was like my first experience of dealing with kids from another town. I thought, like, I'm like middle class in Naperville. You know what I mean? Like, it's not even, I never had thought about myself as being rich, but so I explained that to my dad, and it's like, and this kind of goes back to the white privilege, it's like you've had opportunities that a lot of other people haven't had. So it's just kind of like, just be appreciative of, you don't have to apologize, but be appreciative, acknowledge what you have, right? And so that was kind of like, I think the biggest thing that I got from my dad, because he would say like, there's people, we had people who would say like, oh, that's BS. Like if you work hard enough and do things a certain way, you can make it to any point in life.
The bootstrap myth, right?
From any starting
Everybody can pull
point.
themselves up from their bootstraps.
Yeah. And that's crap, right? I mean, like, no, if you were born in, like, what if I was born in like the inner city or something like that? I didn't know who my dad was. Like there's a lot of things, a lot of difficulties that you could have. So like, I didn't have any of that. So that was my dad's point, is just understand that not everyone, and that's why you're having people view you as like this Naperville kid. Well, they don't know you yet, but that's what they're stereotyping, but that's out there. So
Chris Rock said in one of his sketches that, he lives, obviously he's famous, right? And he said, but his neighbor, his next door neighbor is a dentist.
Yeah.
And so that makes the whole point of what,
Right.
white privilege looks like. A famous comedian who's been in the game for years, living next to, being neighbors with a dentist. You both are athletes.
Right.
And I think one of the ways, and this came up in the last conversation, where Jackie Claremont was talking about how her son is friends with black boys on the basketball team. Mm-hmm. How do you think sports plays into the discussion about race and how people come together? Because I played sports as well, and I think just in that context, in many ways, it's about ability, agility, right? And in many ways, athleticism in sports can be a neutralizer on some levels.
You know, I think it's funny because Cliff and I were talking before the show about the power of sports, and I really do believe that sports is a little bit ahead in terms of
Like
where
the
the
NFL.
broader society, well, ahead in certain instances, and I'll get to that. But I mean, when you think about, we talked about the Drew Brees comment and how.
Can you repeat what that comment
And
was?
yeah, so, you know, I think when asked about his initial reaction to George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and kneeling as the future of the NFL, Drew took an immediate stance behind the flag and started to talk about the importance of the flag and how kneeling was going to be a shot at disrespecting the flag. And then he went into, you know, why he believes that. And for me, I totally get it, right? I mean, I'm a veteran. I understand what he was saying, but there was a part of me that didn't understand what he was trying to make a connection point to, because to me, and I told Cliff this, it's two separate conversations. And the power of sports, you know, I think, you know, I know that some of Drew's black teammates got to him right away and said, you know, real talk here, right?
Yeah.
And I think Drew stepped back and realized what was going on, and it was a mea culpa, and he came back and he said, hey, I'm sorry, and they accepted him back in. That's the part I think where sports is ahead, because I think we have a lot of work to do in the broader society around having these conversations, uncomfortable conversations, bringing, you know, our white brothers and sisters back into the fold, and almost resetting, right? And so I think there's an opportunity here, you know, to have these uncomfortable conversations, and it may not come out right. It may come off a certain way, but if we're going to get to the other side and we're going to get through, we've got to be able to move it forward. And I saw that in that Drew Brees comment.
Do you think it's because of a team aspect,
Yeah.
team dynamic in sports?
No doubt.
Like, yeah,
The bond.
like Gerald said, they held him accountable. Like, so he makes stupid comments that are just misplaced. I don't think necessarily racist,
Right.
but just totally missed the mark. So then he apologizes, and if you don't want to accept the apology, I understand that. But his teammates did, who were initially or immediately pissed when he said it, and then they took him back. And even, you know, Trump tried to say, like, you know, Drews, you were right all along, and he said, no, Mr. President, I was wrong. But that's the power of sports. It's the power of teammates. When you've gone to war with people, you know, race is irrelevant, right? I mean,
Right.
we're saying you're past that. You're past that. You don't even, like, that stuff doesn't really matter anymore. And so it's like if his teammates can bring him back, like, that's a great lesson for all of us, right?
Right.
Like, there's going to be mistakes. I mean, you've seen, like, there was just, like, the Bubba Wallace incident now with the Confederate
on
flag,
NASCAR.
which is not, you know, that's awful. But there's going to be mistakes, and we're going to have to grow, continue to grow. And I think sports is just a great example of breaking down those barriers.
So you segue that perfectly into this idea of allyship, right? So I think a lot of white people think that we need to show up perfectly, that we need to have it all figured out, that we need to be completely anti-racist and showing up. But I think that there's so many different ways to be a good ally. And, you know, I'd love to hear from both of you. Like, you know, for you, Gerald, you know, how are your white friends showing up for you right now? And then you, Cliff, a little bit about your, you know, how you perceive yourself to be an ally in this conversation.
Yeah, so, you know, I'll say some of my white friends have shown up in the sense that they've proactively reached out. We've had conversations, we've talked about it, and some of the conversations have been short, some of the conversations have been long, there have been some emotion. But then there are a lot of friends that haven't. And so, you know, I think about what that means. I think about, you know, how my reaction is going to be when and if I do hear from them, right, at some point. But, you know, I think, again, to your question about, you know, what's the best thing that.
Yeah, what's felt the best for those friends that have called
Yeah.
you in conversations? Like, what for you has filled your bucket, if you will, and made you feel maybe a little lighter about all of this too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is just to listen. Just to listen and really hear the stories, hear the pain, hear the what's the best word I can use? Just all of the different experiences that I've had that tie into George Floyd and tie into all of these other stories that we're seeing on TV now, the Bubba Wallace story, that maybe they've never thought could happen, and that listening and being willing to hear it, but then talk about their vulnerabilities with it and be open to and vulnerable to the opportunity that they have. And then, you know, I think that that's the first part. I think the conversation, the listening, and really with empathy and really wanting to add to the discussion. But then I think there's a separate conversation, which is the action piece. Mm-hmm. And I think that is putting, you know, the rubber to the road in terms of really moving it forward, right? And not just talking. But I think the talking is big because that's the starting point. Mm-hmm. And we have to start somewhere, and that's that uncomfortable conversation.
We were saying like all the corporations have made a statement, you know, following this, which is great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just make a statement and then there's got to be, you know, something else to it. Otherwise, we'll be a couple years from now, we'll have another couple incidents or whatever, and we'll, you know, we don't want to be right back to where we were. Mm-hmm. So I think from my perspective, I think the first thing, like you were just saying, Gerald, for me, it's with like the white privilege, going back to that, is just acknowledging it, like understanding that the pain is real. I understand, like I'm never going to grasp the magnitude for like the two of you of what you've dealt with, the injustice, the oppression. Like I'm not, but I can put myself in your shoes and understand that the pain is real. So I think that's kind of the first thing. And then for me, I guess it's like checking my privilege. So I understand that I have it. Well, can I use it as a platform and do something good with it, right? And you're talking about that principle before. Leadership is so key, but good leadership elevates others, right? And so we need everybody to contribute in this and everybody to feel like they're a part of it. And that's kind of how you move forward. So for me, there's an education perspective of like understanding Black history better. Like I didn't really know what Juneteenth was before. So, I mean, things like that, there's a subconscious aspect of it. So like my firm has talked about doing some subconscious training, which I think that would be a good thing. I know I would do that. So, I don't know, but there's definitely, we need to, when you have conflict or have an event like the George Floyd and some of these other ones that happened prior, because I don't want to say it's not like that's the only incident.
Right.
But when you have conflict, sometimes you get perspective, you get better understanding, and you come out of that with better relationships. And so if that event in turn leads to people having a better understanding of what it's like to be a different race, to be Black, where you're in a town like Naperville where 3/4 of the population is white. If all of this gets us to a better place, then that's progress, and that's really what you're trying to get to out of all this, right? Is make progress out of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was a part of a leadership development program, Leadership Greater Chicago, and I was telling Cliff, we had a conversation a couple days ago with one of our white brothers that was in the class, and he's a all-in Trump supporter, and I appreciate the diversity in our class, and we were talking to him about this Black Lives Matter movement and what. How has that shaped him, or how has that changed the way he's thinking right now, with the political lens, because we know he's really into politics. And, he went into a big, defense, if you will, about his support for Trump and the political piece of it. And then he talked about, he had a picture of Abraham Lincoln above him that was an heirloom in his family, that his great-great-grandmother had this, picture, and he talked about the significance of that to him and the Republican Party, and just went on. And it was wrapped up nice in a bow, and it, was really good reasoning. And, we stepped back after that conversation, and I talked to a couple of my fellows who just were really disturbed by that conversation. And so we put together, Dan put together a long email to send to him that really challenged him to think deeper about it, and not challenged him to think beyond the politics and think about what this means. Let's put Trump to the side for a minute, and let's just think about the time we're in, and you having to think differently about things now, right? And challenge yourself and look into the mirror. And I think that's just a microcosm of what we have up against us right now, everybody, right? To really think about, and again, to your question about, what can, my white friends do, I think is really challenge their inner self.
Yes.
To what they have thought, to what they could be thinking about, and what they can do. And, it gets beyond listening, and I think in taking action is, putting yourself in that uncomfortable situation. And I always wonder in white circles, what the conversation looks like. I just imagine, Cliff, you at the table with your white friends and thinking about what you're talking about off of this. And
Beer.
Yeah, and I just can't. I wonder. It's interesting, right? Because this conversation around when you hear, a friend of yours that may make a comment, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't. You know what I mean? Like, are you challenging him? Are you challenging that friend right there on the spot in that group, or what does that look like? Because to me, that's action.
Yeah.
That's the action you're
that we
talking
can't
about.
see, but that's action that's going to move it forward.
Absolutely.
In terms of stepping up to say, hey, you know what, bro, let's talk about that, because
Not cool.
that's not cool, right?
Well, a lot of times those conversations are happening because there's no black people around, right? Like, those are only coming out. People are sometimes only showing those stripes.
I've got a friend where that happens all the time.
Just like
He's
offhanded.
Cuban. And so, but he presents like a white man. He's a cardiologist. And so he's Cuban. And so, he hears it all the time.
Yeah.
And it's about speaking up in those moments and saying something.
Right.
Because that's how you affect change.
Right.
The problem with the principal in the story that you mentioned earlier is that they were afraid to inconvenience the family that said it,
Right.
make them feel awkward or bad. You need to feel awkward,
Right.
not as necessarily a punishment, but to understand and truly get the fact that that's not okay.
Right.
And what you do in your home, no one can necessarily change that. But when you come outside and when you come out of those walls, how you interact in the world
Right.
needs to be more humane,
Right.
needs to be better. And that's the only way we can really make progress.
We're talking a lot about the idea of courageous conversations, uncomfortable conversations, and a theme that I've been hearing a lot of is sitting with your discomfort, right? And there's so many, we were talking earlier with the segment with the moms about social media and how it's a blessing and a curse right now, right? There's so much imagery and there's so much negativity, there's so much hatred, but there's also some really great things coming out of it, great information and knowledge sharing about anti-racism and things like that. But one of the quotes that I read on social media was, the system's not broken, it was designed this way. And I remember reading that and sitting with that, right, as a white person and thinking, that's powerful, right? Like, now let me really sit and think about and reflect on, it was designed this way. How am I benefiting from this design? And how are others suffering from this design? But more importantly, I know it was built this way and it's not broken, but that doesn't mean we can't fix it, right? And so this parenting conversation truly is about how we're going to fix it, right?
Right.
It's in our hands, whether you're a parent or not, but I think we feel an additional responsibility because the 3 lives, the 4 lives, the 2
Right.
lives, the 2 lives,
Right.
right? Just in this room
Yeah.
that we are fostering,
Right.
right? Like the power of just our group of children alone, right? If we just
Right.
put, right, and then we brought Jackie and Kim out and their children, another
Right.
4 and another 2, like the power of just that
impactful.
collective group is really
Mm-hmm.
powerful.
I want these types of conversations to be the norm, where people of color, people not of color, different ethnicities, religions, backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, can really just come together and just be people. Whether you're at the playground with the water park, the splash pad, or whether you're in a restaurant somewhere, you're at a bar, and you're just having conversations with people. I liked the idea of what you said before about the team aspect. You know, it's having that camaraderie that allows you to have uncomfortable moments, sit in discomfort, you know, be accountable for what you say, make mistakes, and then be back into the fold.
Right.
What's more human than that? And so that's what I think this is really all about. So I thank you both for joining us for this conversation, because
Thank
I
you.
hope
Yeah, thank
people
you.
are getting some of the gems from this that came from you and are implementing them in their daily grind and what they're doing to be aware, to be conscious, to take action, because it's the kind of thing that we need. And I think that's what's so important. And it's what we get that helps us to find
Common ground.